And we are live. Have a seat. None so far. All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second one of the Access Habitable Planet online course live events. As everybody probably knows by now, my name is Carl Palmer. I work for Access as the Education and Training Portfolio Management here at the Access offices in Cape Town. And it's my great pleasure to welcome everybody watching across the country to the second of our three online events. And in this one, we get to engage with one of the really interesting topics from Habitable Planet, and that's looking at the biology and the chemistry of why the Earth is habitable. And so we started the course, and it's been 7 weeks ago now, when we came to ask for the first time the question, well, if we know about all of these planets out in the universe, we know about tens of thousands of them now, and yet only one of them we know to be habitable, the Earth. Why is that? What is it that's so special about the Earth that it stands out from all of those other planets? And since then, we've been going through breaking this question down into smaller questions that we can understand, using models, using science to try and explain and to interrogate that. And so many of you might remember all that time ago, we're talking 7 weeks ago now, we first heard a talk from Domasani where he investigated the question, well, you know, or he suggested the hypothesis, maybe Earth is habitable because it's the right distance from the sun. And we did some simple physics, and we found out that actually, if the Earth was just a ball of rock, the right distance from the sun, it would be far too cold for life. And since then, what we've been doing is we've been adding gradual layers of complexity to that model. And so we went from just a bare rock to a rock with an atmosphere that's static. And we found that that planet would be far too hot. We then made the atmosphere move and the ocean move to recirculate heat, and we found that that gives us weather and climate, and all sorts of interesting things came out of that. And then we looked at, we had what was quite a nice static picture of the physical Earth, and then we looked at paleoclimates. We realized that in order to understand how the Earth functions today and why it's habitable, we need to go back in time and see how it functioned in the past. But now, coming to today, we've come to this incredible realization that this physical model of the Earth isn't good enough. We can't actually explain why the Earth is habitable without bringing in chemistry and biology. And that's actually a really fascinating catch-22, that we can't explain why the Earth's habitable without life itself. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to recap that story, and we're going to answer your guys' questions around the biology and the chemistry of why the Earth's habitable. To do that, we've assembled a team of some really interesting scientists, and I think it's fair to say from across the world and across South Africa, to try and answer your questions and to develop these interesting discussions on what's so important about biology and chemistry. So before we start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go round the scientists that we have involved, and I'm going to get them all to just give a quick introduction to themselves, what they study, and how they've come through to Habitable Planet. So I'm going to start with the furthest away from Cape Town and move closer to home. And so firstly, I'd like to ask Chris to introduce yourself. Where are you? What do you study?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So I'm Chris Bennett. I'm actually in Atlanta right now, which is in America, just above Florida. So it's 6 a.m. here, very early. I'm an astrochemist, and what that is we basically try to simulate the chemistry in different astronomical environments. So primarily we'll do that by using radiation, and we'll see how that radiation interacts with ices or rocky surfaces, and we can see what kind of molecules are produced there. So this has some implications for the origin of life, and also like a lot of astronomy. It's very interdisciplinary. So I have some expertise in a little of those areas, but not a whole lot. So I try and work on projects like how you could form water on the moon, and how you could form amino acids, for example, in cometary ices and things like that. So it's a brief introduction. I don't know how long I'll be so.
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you, Chris. Chris, as you saw on the online course, gave some really interesting insights into the water talk and also the origins of live talk. I actually originally met Chris and therefore brought him into this course about 10 years ago, where I met him in a corridor to go and talk to a crazy German scientist. But more of that story on another time. Next, I think geographically we have Hector and Glyn in the University of Venda. Do you guys like to introduce yourselves? Hello, Hector and Glyn. Can you hear me, guys? Hector's looking confused. Hector? Okay. Hector, can you hear us? Let's move on to Kabir. We'll come back to Hector in a minute.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Then, can you guys introduce yourselves?
Venda.
Can you guys introduce yourselves?
Hmm. Can you hear? The connection is poor here.
We can hear you now.
Okay. All right. My name is Hector Chikore. I am a meteorologist by training. I'm also a climatologist. I'm a lecturer at the University of Venda. I just joined recently from the University of Zululand, and I'm interested in the weather scale, the climate scale, and to some extent the climate change scale and how that affects society and how that makes the earth to be habitable. Yeah.
Nice one. Thank you, Hector. And Glenn?
Hi, Glenn here. I'm Glenn Pindiama, postgraduate student at the University of Venda. I'm into water chemistry, freshwater chemistry to be specific.
Thank you very much, guys. Perfect. Can we go to you?
Okay.
Hi, my name is Kabir Pirbai. I'm at the University of Kwazulu-Natal in Pietermaritzburg. I'm a PhD student specializing in modeling using remote sensing and GIS. My area of expertise falls within mapping plant invasions and forest species mapping. As you know from the last Habitable Planet, one of the panelists, and I'm ready to answer your questions.
Nice one. Thank you very much, Kabir. That's a nice introduction. And then moving closer to home, we have Liko in the Eastern Cape. Could you just say a few words, Liko?
Hello everyone, my name is Liko. I'm at Rhodes University in the Eastern Cape. I'm a master's student at the Department of Zoology. I'm doing trophic ecology. I'm looking at the connection between the terrestrial food webs and the aquatic food webs, and using amphibians as the connectors between these two ecosystems. I'm joined here by Rob.
Hi, I'm Rob O'Donoghue at the Environmental Learning Research Centre, and I'm involved in education and social change.
Thank you.
Okay, nice one. Thank you very much, guys. Very nice to have you here. So first time doing a connection to the Eastern Cape, and we're very glad to have that region represented. And then moving extremely close to me, we have furthest to my left, Rendani.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Rendani Mrauzi. I'm a master's student, graduate from the University of Venda. I specialized in behavioral ecology of the primates. I'm currently working for Access on the education program.
All right, thank you. And then last and certainly not least, sat immediately to my left, we have the Director of Access, Dr. Neville Swade.
So hello everybody. I think I know a lot of you, but in case you don't, I'm Neville Swade. My scientific career was in marine science, and in particular in the application of molecular genetics to fisheries. So my background is in molecular genetics and evolution, and applications coming therefrom.
Perfect, thank you, Neville. One of the things that I'd really like to pick up on is that one of the central ambitions of Access is to teach and to do research in a truly multidisciplinary way. And I hope that that really comes through in the group of scientists that I've assembled today, going from everything from conservation biologists to astrochemists and geneticists, water chemists, etc. And I hope that what we'll get from this is this sense of how, by working in a multidisciplinary way, we are able to engage with and solve problems that we couldn't do just working individually within our disciplines. Now, we're going to go, just like last time, the same format. I'm going to ask each speaker for a quick, very, very brief, 2 minutes overview of the topic, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to put your questions to them. Now, we got loads of questions this time and loads of really interesting ones, and we can't possibly get through them all in just this 2-hour session, but we're going to do the best we can. So just two things to say. Firstly, if we don't answer your question now verbally, we're going to ask our specialists to provide a written answer to all of the questions, and I will make sure I release that with next week's course. So if your question doesn't get answered today, don't worry too much. We will actually make sure that we get you an answer. The second thing is to say that, once again, what I've had to do is prioritize the questions that are relevant to this section, to the biology and chemistry. I got a lot, surprisingly, and I'm not sure why, I got a lot of really interesting oceanography questions that would have been brilliant to put to Hayley, our oceanographer, who spoke last time, but we don't have Hayley here this time, and we don't have an oceanographer, so I'm going to have to ask her to comment on those in the written form. And then secondly, once again, we've got lots of questions which touch on anthropological and social issues, stuff to do with humans, and that's coming up in the course later. And so, to some extent, I've had to try and put those to one side. But we'll do our best, and let's hope that we have an interesting discussion. Okay, so we're going to start, firstly, with going through the course. And in this section where we started thinking about biology and chemistry, the first talk was on the origins of life. So I'd like to pass over to Chris. And if you can, Chris, what I'm looking for really is just a 2-minute summary of what's the current scientific opinion on the origins of life? How does that link into why the planet's habitable?
Okay, 2 minutes. All right. So the talk we really went into is like trying to determine what we know about the origin of life is like it started really early on Earth, like almost as soon as the Earth formed, there was life. So the question is like, how did that life begin? Was it started from scratch on Earth, or was a lot of these compounds brought to the Earth by a process known as panspermia? So panspermia is like life started somewhere other than Earth, being brought to Earth, and the question being like, how evolved would that material be? Could it be as far as DNA, or would it just be something like amino acids and sugars coming? So then when you get to the Earth, there's the idea of like, how does life start? And you have a big problem with life because we have most of the work done by our body today is by enzymes, which are proteins, but they cannot carry any genetic information. So the problem being that you can't really, even though you can form proteins fairly easily in a prebiotic environment, you cannot really form life because there's no information to get passed down. On the other hand, if you have something like DNA, there's no way that can actually, it can store information, but it cannot transmit, pass on and do any biological activity. So the thought right now is that there's this thing called the RNA world, where you have this like RNA, which is similar to DNA, that is able to do both. And so that's basically where things are going, is like, how did we get as far as getting to RNA? That's basically in 2 minutes a sum up of where we are right now, I think.
That was absolutely perfect, and thank you very much, Chris. I'm going to go on to ask the questions in this section. I have to say, this is the section, I think, that generated the most questions, and also, basically, it's almost going to be all you answering, Chris. So be prepared, but actually, let's just miss that one. Okay, so the first one that we've got on the list is regarding carbon. So it's Tapelo Mapu asks, why is the usage of carbon so important compared to other elements in the periodic table? I mean, there are no other elements that can produce energy-rich compounds, question mark. So I guess what they're asking is why is biological organic life settled on carbon? Are there other possible substitutes?
Okay. So one of the good things about carbon is it's in group 4 of the periodic table, which means it's tetravalent. So this means you can get like a far richer variety of different organic compounds than with almost any of the other elements in the periodic table. People often point out that there is silicon, which is also in group 4, one step below, which could also form tetravalent compounds. However, the bond strengths are a little bit less stable, and also the abundance of silicon is about a factor of 10 lower. So yes, you could have silicon, particularly if you have, for example, like a rocky planet close to a star, or like a lot of the terrestrial planets. Feasibly, maybe something like silicon could be something that you could have life. It's just a lot less likely. The other thing for carbon is that it's like one of the most abundant elements in the universe. Hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen, most of the things we're made out of, happen to also be the most abundant elements. So it's possible, but just probably less likely.
Why is that, Chris? Why are they the most abundant elements?
Why are they the most abundant elements? Well, that's a bit more of a tricky question. Basically, it's because of how the fusion process that occurs inside stars adds together by, there's a process you burn hydrogen atoms to make helium, and then you can combine helium atoms together to make like oxygen and carbon, and there's a whole bunch of other like nuclear processes that go on to make a lot of these elements. But like eventually, like you get less and less abundant species as you get higher in mass. To a first approximation. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but unfortunately, that's not my field.
That's perfect. Thank you, Chris. We've got one question which follows on the origin of life. Andile Tonga wrote in to ask, is evolution an ongoing process? If so, what are the latest findings? And I asked Neville to comment as our geneticist.
Okay, well, in direct answer to that question, is evolution an ongoing process? Yes, indeed it is. And so what are the latest findings? It's a more difficult question to answer because I'm not sure what the question is specifically referring to. I suspect that question is referring to human evolution, in which case the answer is very complicated, but the answer is yes. So I think what's important to understand, and this might pertain to some questions which I'll answer later, but what I think is important to understand is that evolution is a long-term process that happens over several generations of particular species, in particular organism. And so a lot of the changes that occur happen at the level of a population. So what that means is, if you have a range of different features, like it could be height, or it could be longevity, it could be a physiological feature, there's a range of those within the population. Some are taller than others, as an example. And so depending on what the selective pressure is, so you will see a change in the next generation and perhaps one after that, which is eventually measurable. So in order to actually measure the process of evolution, it really takes several generations to see if there are indeed features or phenotypic physical features that are emerging in time. So it's very slow, but what is important is that some of the drivers of evolution, if you like, the selective pressures, that cause evolution, in global change and climate change, those are changing much, much faster, and much faster than they have over geological time periods. So what is changing is that not so much the process of evolution, but the selective pressures. So, for example, temperature tolerances, which are physiological features, or other features which might make you more fit or less fit in different environmental circumstances. So that is interesting because that's going to have an impact on the way evolution develops and how these features develop in species. And then my final quick point on this one is in terms of human evolution. Well, you will know, of course, that society has changed incredibly since humans were, if you like, living a more natural lifestyle. And so now, even with things like the internet or things like social media in general, the way in which people breed is changing so fast that it's indeed changing in what was perhaps patterns or genetic patterns that might have been set up in the past. So we see different groups of people from all over the world intermarrying and mixing up genetic lines which might have been separating in other geological ways. So indeed, in short, the answer is evolution is indeed an ongoing process, and the latest findings, if anything, are really more at the molecular level or the mechanisms at the cellular level, rather than the theory of evolution changing itself, because I think that is well established.
Okay, and so is it true to say then that if selective pressure is changing faster, that evolution will occur faster, or is there a danger that it doesn't keep up?
Well, there are two outcomes to that. One is indeed it can happen faster. There are examples where adaptation and genetic selection happens very quickly. On the other hand, there might become a situation where a species as a whole is maladapted in new circumstances and will go extinct.
Okay, thank you. It was a very nice answer and interesting to hear from. We're sort of bouncing around the ideas of origins of life here, and the next one question comes back to the very origin itself. So I will put this to Chris, and basically it's from Basanda Mandlazi. And to summarize what he said that the general theory of the origin of life looks at it starting in water and moving on to land. But he asked, could it have been possible that rather life started at numerous locations? Chris?
Yeah, so it depends who you talk to on this matter. A lot of people, so it is actually a problem for like the origin of life, particularly the origin of peptides, that a lot of these processes don't like water around. They're actually condensation reactions when you form a peptide bond from two amino acids or removing water. So that process, of course, is not very efficient if you're in a body of water. So the solution a lot of like astrobiologists have come up with is you have this like idyllic scenario where you have a volcano sitting by an ocean, and you end up with this like warm little pond that occasionally like water will spill in, a little bit of amino acids, and then they'll dry off, and you're up with a concentrated layer on the surface of amino acids that can then react together to make these peptides. And in that scenario, like it seems very unlikely that you'd have multiple of these ideal little balls and volcanoes. So it kind of suggests that life might have started in just one place. Personally, I don't find that very believable. The alternative solution is that you might have something like a lot of interstellar, like from comets. So whenever you see a meteor shower, what actually passing through is what is left behind from a comet. And so there's a lot of like particles that rain down, and these are able to like bring a lot of organics to the surface of Earth. And so if the early surface of Earth was very hot, you'd actually have an ideal place where you can form a lot of like, these peptide bonds. And so it depends what you call life, as far as like if it started early or not. But you can have like a lot of regions where you would get a lot of like organic molecules and perhaps peptides that might have some enzymatic function, and then somehow later on that became life. Was there more than one place? I don't think we can really answer that at this point in time. We may never know.
Awesome. Chris, this is Neville. I have a question for you. And this is a question pertains from, let's say, public conversations Carl and I have had several times before. And the question is a virus a living organism?
So Good question. So I actually think the role of viruses has been underplayed. So viruses are not typically classed as life because they don't have their own machinery. They basically like hijack your machinery and like use that to replicate themselves. However, viruses are a lot more simple. So, for example, like the simplest organism of life, I think it was like Craig Venda's group figured out that you need about 250 genes to be able to like have an organism that like is like self-sustaining, has all the metabolic pathways, and can generate its own RNA, etc., polymerases. Whereas viruses only have about 7 or 10 genes in them. So feasibly, they're a lot more simple, and they could have been precursors to like a cell. It's possible that like, you know, there would have been primordial viruses that might have had some of the machinery to do some aspects, like one virus might have been able to make lipids, one virus might have been able to metabolize things, and eventually might have got together to make life. Who knows? But yeah, I think the role of viruses is very important, personally. But yeah,
the question, though.
What was the question? Sorry, did I not?
Are they alive?
No. I mean, not really. It's ask me a different day, I'll probably say yes. I don't know.
It's an interesting debate. I always argue to Neville that they surely must be. I mean, they pass on genetic information, and for example, animals can't survive without the role of plants. Like we could survive in isolation.
It's simply it's one of those questions which I think it depends largely on your definition of what constitutes what comprises life.
Right.
Also going to be the same kind of answer which comes a bit later for some questions about what is a species. But we'll get to those later.
But if you had to place it, it's with the biological world or the rocks and the non-biological, surely it comes in the former. Surely.
Yeah, it's definitely biological. Yeah, I mean, from that definition, it's life, but yeah.
Okay, I have to press on, guys, but it's a really interesting discussion that we can maybe continue on Twitter. I'm going to go with this one really quickly. Mwazadile Sevilla asks, are there any scientific findings that have revealed the true age of the Earth? I personally am aware of uranium-lead dating that's identified the oldest rocks on the Earth, and they're about 3.5 billion years old, I think. Chris, can you add any more to that very briefly?
Yeah, so I think you're right. Like the largest like whole rocks that they've found on the Earth, I think they have dated some to about 3.9 billion years old. There's nothing earlier than that because there was a period early on in the Earth's history where what's thought to have happened is actually Jupiter and Saturn are like actually migrating. These like massive planets are migrating, and this caused a lot of comets and asteroids to impact the Earth and the Moon. So you look at the Moon and you see all the craters on the Moon. Most of these formed at around about. We actually have taken rocks. We went to the Moon and aged the rocks around the craters, and most of these craters are about the same age, about 4 billion years old. So it is believed that there was a lot of like bombardment on the early Earth, and this would have been very catastrophic, and which is why there are no rocks earlier than that. There have been some small zircons that have been found on the Earth. They've been aged at about 4.4 billion years. Those are in Australia, I believe. And those, like, there's some controversy about whether or not everyone believes that answer or not. However, the Earth is actually believed to be 4.54 billion years old. And this is through lead dating. So it's actually very important that when you do this dating, there's actually about, I don't know, maybe like a handful of different techniques you can use based on different isotopes. They all give approximately the same answer. The most accurate is believed to be from lead isotopes because they're the same compound, theoretically. So like, there's just different isotopes of lead decay at different rates. So from that, like, you know, that should get incorporated at the same rate as well. Whereas if you have different isotopes, they might, from different compounds, they might get, you know, split. Say, for example, like one metal might not go into the core, whereas the other one does. So then you get a splitting that's like artificially going to give you a different age. So there's just a few things. So like the actual age comes from the fact that we actually find meteorites that have landed, and those are actually like older than the Earth. So those have been aged like 4.67 billion years old. which is where we get our age of the solar system. And this is quite consistent. They've also found, I think, on the moon, about dating to back to like 4.5 billion years as well. And they think that basically the Earth would have formed between like 30 to 250 million years ago. I mean, okay. After the solar system, sorry, not ago.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Very comprehensive answer. The next question, let's say a lot of this section is going to go to you, and I think this one you'll have some strong opinions about. It says there's a vast. This is from Henrik Oliver, and Henrik says that there's a vast amount of money being spent on space exploration. Is it really worth it? He says that money could rather be used here on Earth with conservation projects, educating people. What's the use of exploring other planets if stuff being funded here on Earth has to suffer in the process?
Okay, so I'm not sure exactly what they mean by is Earth suffering. I mean, that gives the impression that we'd actually use that money to help the Earth if we didn't use it for space. And I think it's an argument that goes on in the States a lot, actually. And so I can give you an answer for like how this relates to Africa, in comparison. But I can't tell you how it relates to NASA, because this argument is going on all the time. So in actual fact, like the budget for NASA is actually a very small percentage of the spending overall. It's 0.5% of the budget. So if you compare that, like all of the money given to NASA over the entire time since the 1950s, that did all of that science, is less than 1 year's spending of the US military. So you put that into perspective, it's basically just a tiny, tiny amount. There's also a lot of advantages.
That's a whole other can of worms, Chris. The military spending is just vastly disproportionate.
Well, true. But we also put that into perspective that NASA's budget is overinflated as well. When you compare the fact that like India's space program has done things at like 10% of the cost of NASA as well, like is it really that expensive? You can actually do a lot of really great science. So the other thing is that there's been a lot of economic studies that show every dollar you put into NASA, you get somewhere between $7 and $20 back into the economy. There's also a lot of technology that comes out of it. So like a lot of like fire-resistant materials. Vacuum technologies like sensors, just like long-distance communication, etc. Just come out of these different programs.
The one example that's always given is non-stick pans. But are you seeing that but wouldn't we actually have got non-stick pans a lot faster and cheaper if we just put the money into researching non-stick pans?
If we'd have known to research non-stick pans, I mean, the thing is, like, you sometimes don't realize the use for these things until later on. You know what I mean? Like, so, for example, yeah, good example. I mean, there's another side to it too. I think like the whole thing about space exploration is it does give everyone a sense of awe and wonder about the world. For example, if you were to ask your parents, where they were when they found out about we've landed on the moon, they probably will remember that day. Just because it's a fairly big event, right? And I just think it helps,
No, it's got huge symbolic value, is basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
Neville says you could ask the same question about Formula One racing, but I don't think we'll go down that line right now. But a question which I think is a really, really fascinating one, and we should definitely spend a little bit of time on. It comes from Martin de Dawn, and their question is, which other planets possess the potential to be habitable in respect to the Earth's physical and chemical characteristics? Where else in the universe, Chris, do you think we might find life?
Are you talking in the solar system or outside the solar system?
Anywhere in the universe. What's your best bet? Maybe give an answer to both, quickly. Brief answer to both, solar system and outside.
Okay, so in the solar system, this is where a lot of NASA's because we can't go outside our solar system right now. So a lot of the research is focused on where else there might be life in the solar system. And actually, there's a lot of spacecraft around Mars, as you probably are aware. There's one that just went into orbit called Maven, which is trying to study what happened to the ocean or the water on Mars. What we know is that there was, a few million years ago or billion years ago, oceans or water running on the Martian surface. and it's no longer there. So like a lot of these folks have to try and find out, where it went, because there could have been life on Mars, or there might still be life on Mars. We don't know. So anywhere else in the solar system, there might be liquid water, is where we're looking at. A lot of the moons of Saturn and Jupiter are icy on the outside, but on the inside they might be warmer and have liquid water. So these are also targets for a lot of space missions. If there's liquid water, they're going to try and find it. So that's in the solar system. Outside the solar system, there are about 50 or so, I think, exoplanets that have been classed as habitable. I think there's about 4,000 candidates right now, about 2,000 confirmed. So we know about 2,000 exoplanets. And when they say like habitable, what they mean is Earth-like. I mean, basically the requirement is that there's liquid water. And you can look this up. They've basically like ranked them according to like an Earth similarity index, based on like how far away they are from the sun, the mass, density, surface temperature, etc. And there's a few, just so I can pull one up. They're actually like fairly close to the Earth, and I think these are the more interesting ones, because these are the ones that if we were to have space travel, like be able to travel to these distances, we might be able to get to these planets. So there are some. There's one called Tau Ceti, for example, which is thought to be habitable and is only 12 light years away. So if we could travel at the speed of light, it would only take us 12 years to get there. Now, unfortunately, we can't travel anywhere near that fast, so it would actually take us right now something like 50,000 years or something to get there. But if we get a little bit faster, like 1% the speed of light, it would be 100 years or so, 1,000 years. There's also thoughts that even like our closest star, Alpha Centauri, which is 4 light years away, may also harbor a planetary system. And so that's very close.
I suppose it would be quite a lot of serious changes in the way we view the world if we travel close to the speed of light, other than being able to visit the planets.
Yes.
Just 2 points. One is that are you actually implying that Klingon is not really a real language? No, that's my joke. My real question was that to iterate the point that life on another planet might not be intelligent life. In other words, we're not expecting to see alien beings,
bacteria,
see a bacteria or an organism of one form that qualifies as living. Even organic molecules would be a huge find, I imagine, even if they're not in the form of the cell. So we obviously have a particular perspective on what we think life might be, but of course it might be quite different.
No, for sure. Chris, next one nearly through yours, so I'll stop grilling you shortly. It comes from Nigel Jalazzi, and he said, what theory stands above the rest with regards to the origin of life on Earth? So I think really he's asking you, what do you think is the best theory on it?
So actually, we already talked about it briefly. So the answer I'm supposed to give is this RNA. RNA is this molecule in our body that basically can, they're called ribozymes, are the actual molecules. They basically can store genetic information, and they can also have biological function. So they're supposed to be like the best candidates, and that's like how life is supposed to have began. But I actually think, that basically, if you have a world and you're able to form peptides initially, then these eventually will have enzymatic function, and at some point you might be able to get something like viruses, etc., or something that resembles those, like little parts of life, and this would eventually come together to make an organism that we know today. But was there more to that question? Sorry, Carl.
That's perfect. Thank you. And I think you can see by the sheer number of questions you've got that this topic really, really of interest to the planet is. I'm going to press on now. There'll still be some for you in the next section, but I'd like to firstly ask Glyn in Venda, could you give us a quick 2-minute summary of what's so amazing about water? Hello, Glyn. Can you hear us? Yeah. Venda, can you hear us? Venda, hello.
Now,
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me, Carl?
Yes. Go for it.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go for it.
Okay.
what's the question? What's the question?
Glenn, can you give us a summary of why
A
water?
brief overview of amazing water. Oh, okay. Water is one of the most important molecules which makes the planet Earth the habitable planet because of its unique properties. And these properties are made possible because of the structure of the water molecule, which, okay, in general, water is made up of oxygen, which is covalently bonded to two hydrogen atoms. And because of the high electronegativity of oxygen, it gives the whole water molecule partial charges, with oxygen being partially negative charged and hydrogen being partially positively charged. So this allows neighboring water molecules to have hydrogen bonds between each other. So because of those hydrogen bonds, it gives water unique properties. For example, it makes water to have high latent heat. It makes water to have high surface tension, and it also makes water solid water, which is ice, to be less dense than liquid water. That's why ice tends to float on top of liquid water. So there are quite a number of properties which are unique to water only, and they are mainly as a result of the hydrogen bonds. Some of the properties include high specific heat capacity. It's an excellent solvent. I think besides maybe the only other comparable could be ethanol, but almost everything else is soluble in water. And that's the reason why most biochemical and the most important biochemical reactions, they take place in aqueous solution. And I've mentioned a bit about its high surface tension, which allows even some insects and other small organisms to walk on the surface of water. And also, water is, to a very large extent, the biggest greenhouse gas. So it's responsible for keeping the atmospheric temperatures to an optimal level. So in general, those are some of the basic properties and unique properties of water, which makes it unique and which allows life on Earth to be possible, or which makes the planet Earth to be the only habitable planet.
Perfect.
So,
really nice
in a nutshell, those are the...
Thank you, Glenn. Really, really nice. Can you hear me all right, Glenn? Just delayed.
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay. I'll bear in mind there's a slight delay on your line. Okay, so in terms of water questions, we only had a handful, and actually I've noticed the first one really belongs in the last section. I put it in this section because it hinges around the presence of liquid water. And so the question comes from Ronald S. Mushi, who asks, is it true that planet Kepler 186f is habitable for life, or has any life that's been detected there? So I'm afraid it's back to you again, Chris.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I can. Okay, so just okay, so planet 186F is actually we have not detected life. I can say that for sure. It's actually from it was detected using the transit method, which is when there's a star and a planet passes in front of it. You see a dip in the intensity, so you can't see that. So if a star and a planet comes along and passes in front of it, you actually see a dip in the intensity of the sun. And so from that, we can't really say a lot about what's on the planet. So all we know is that the star is a lot weaker than the sun. It puts out a lot less heat. So therefore, Kepler is actually 186F is about Earth size and orbits very close to the star. So it might be in the range where there's liquid water present, but we don't really know beyond that. We have to wait until like the next generation of telescopes come out, which, so for example, the James Webb in 2018 should be able to look at the atmosphere and see if there is water, CO2, maybe even ozone or methane.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Next question, we're going to Fiona McLennan. Fiona says, I'm amazed at the fact that despite water being a precious resource and so limited, it has managed to sustain human life on Earth this long. I wonder how many billions of litres of water we have gone through since inhabiting the Earth. I don't think, by the way, that's a question we don't need to answer, how many billions. Why are there not more desalinization plants along coastlines in our country in order to produce more of this precious resource? Surely the initial cost would be high. We recoup that once we start pumping water. Or is there more to this fact? So Glenn, I'd like to direct the question to you. And really, there's two parts. Is we've used so much water. Why did it not run out? And secondly, why don't we build more desalinization plants?
Glenn has just gone out a little bit. He's coming now. Carl, can you just hold that question a little bit?
Okay. Well, I'll go for it for now. I think the first point, it's really important, Fiona, to recognise the fact that, and maybe I didn't make enough of this in my water talk, that water is actually a very, very stable chemical. It doesn't react with very much. Within the Earth system, it gets recycled. And this is a really important part that we get to in biogeochemistry and throughout the whole, really, of habitable planet. One of the key reasons why Earth is habitable is that everything is recycled. It doesn't run out. We're an isolated system, but the water goes through clouds into the oceans, evaporates back into clouds, it rains onto the land, it gets back to the oceans, but it never gets destroyed. It gets cycled round and round, so we never run out. On the second point, very, very quickly, the issue of desalinization plants is one of my favorite ones in habitable planets, because we get a lot of conservationists moaning about how little water there is, and I often try and play devil's advocate by pointing out that there's masses of water, and of course all we have to do is change it into a usable form. Now, there is a big cost to this, and it's that desalinization of water is a very, very energy-intensive process. So, of course, you have to produce a lot of electricity to do it, and there's your downside. So we have two very, very difficult problems facing humanity. One is climate change, and one is the lack of drinking water. If we use energy, and we assume at the minute that's fossil fuel energy, to produce more drinking water, we solve one problem, but we risk making another problem worse. Okay, moving on. Next question we have is from Daniel Marobo, who asks, what can be done to solve the problem of more unpredictable weather in the coming days and near future? I'm going to put that one to Hector, please.
Thanks, Carl. In fact, we have witnessed significant or huge advances in predictability of the weather at short time scales in recent times, and this has been partly to do with the improvement of the weather models, because weather forecasting largely depends on numerical weather prediction, numerical weather models which assist weather forecasters in the prediction, in formulating the weather forecast. But of course, I must hasten to say that weather models by themselves are just guidance which forecasters then use and also combine with their own experiences as well as local factors in coming up with a forecast. So Well, one of the reasons, in fact, the predictability is different depending on whether you are in the mid-latitudes or you are in the tropics. You find that there is higher predictability in the subtropics and in the mid-latitudes because the weather there is it depends on mass pressure than in the tropics, where the weather depends largely on convection, and convection occurs at much smaller scales than changes in mass. And so you find that weather systems are much more predictable if you are living in subtropics or mid-latitudes than if you are living in the tropical regions where convection is a key process. And convection, you find that the grid sizes in numerical weather models, they tend to be larger than such certain processes, such as what we call subgrid processes, such as convection, such as thunderstorms, and so you find that these processes are estimated. They're estimated in the models, and so what we call parameterized. And you find that there are certain different parameterization schemes that are not applicable to certain regions, and so. One way to get over that is to increase the resolution of the models by making the higher resolution. But of course, when you increase the resolution of the model, the horizontal resolution, you are also increasing the computing resources required for generating these forecasts. And so you find that you won't be able, you increase the horizontal resolution, you also reduce how far out you'll be able to get in terms of in terms of the number of days you can see ahead. But I must hasten to say that in addition to increasing the resolution of the models, you also we can also use what are called ensemble products. An ensemble is a group of forecasts. Remember, the atmosphere is a non-linear dynamical system, and therefore it is not entirely predictable. We know that meteorology is an inexact science, and therefore you find that the models we can only do so much. There are also, you find that it is much small processes which are occurring at smaller scales, such as severe thunderstorms, such as hailstorms, or even the orographic effects. Those are some of the processes which forecasters sometimes find difficult to pick up in the models, because they appear as small perturbations in the large scale. It's a lot easier to forecast large-scale weather systems, large-scale processes, than localized processes such as convection or thunderstorms, or severe thunderstorms or hailstorms, which often occur over very small and localized scales. Of course, that's where you bring in experienced forecasters will be able to pick up these severe weather events, because some of these severe weather events which other forecasters are not able to pick appear as small perturbations in the large scale, and they may not be visible to the novice. And so you do have that, but like I've said, you also need experienced forecasters, and then you need ensembles, which is a group of forecasts. There is ensembles where you run the forecast several times with slightly perturbed initial conditions, or there is ensembles where you take different products, a product from ECMWF, a product from ANSEP, a product from the UK Met Office, a product from the South African Weather Service, and group them together and come up with an ensemble, and therefore generate a probability forecast. But of course, once you generate a probability forecast already, that probabilities by themselves are representations of uncertainty. I must say at the end that we have made huge advances in the forecasting of severe weather in recent years, and this has been to a large extent due to ensemble forecasting, as well as good training of forecasters, experienced forecasters who understand their local features, which tend to also affect the large scale.
Thank you, Hector. It was a very comprehensive answer. I hope Daniel will take that on board. I can also offer to people like Daniel that I will make the contact details of today's guests available, so you can always continue and email them questions. The next question comes from someone called Dio Masotla. Dio, you have become simultaneously my least and most favorite student for your questions. two questions, one of which I'm going to shout at you for, and one of which I think is brilliant. So let me get the bad one out of the way with. Dio asks, is the presence of oxygen the only parameter for Earth to be habitable? Dio, my response is no, 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 don't watch the talk on water. Water, as far as we're aware, is the, go watch my talk, go watch my talk. It's water, not oxygen. But the second question, I think, is brilliant, and I'm going to throw it open to anyone who wants to comment. And the question is, what makes Earth so resilient to all of this overexploitation? It's a really open-ended question. Now, I would also ask, is it really that resilient? If there's anybody who wants to comment, can you put your hand up?
The question is how Earth resilient to what exactly? To
climate change, overexploitation. Why is it so resilient?
It's not. I mean, the fact is that Earth is only the way we know it in the very recent past. The Earth has been very, very different planets, unrecognizable. The only thing that was in common with Earth, say, you know, in the time of the dinosaurs, was the fact that they're the same shape and have the same, probably, we're not even sure, at the same period around the sun. Other than that, the you would never recognize it as planet Earth. Different climate, different vegetation, different biota altogether, different configuration of planets, different ocean currents. It was completely another planet, and this planet has changed.
Then
somebody must
Perfect. Can I maybe suggest then that what makes the Earth so resilient is its ability to adapt and change, but it reinvents itself every time whenever things change.
I mean, the fact is that life is being continuous in the sense that living organisms have evolved over time to become a different set. So when the dinosaurs were in demise, so the mammals rose, and so on and so forth, and there were different mammals to the mammals that we have now, and so on and so forth. So yes, in the sense that there's been change all the time, and it's adapted and evolved to become a different planet. And the changes have been both physical and biological. And yes, climate change doesn't mean it will destroy all life. Certainly, it might cause a massive change to the composition of life. So, in the sense that the planet is resilient, in the sense that it can sustain life still, the question is what form of life will it sustain? Certainly not the life as we know it. So it will be a different planet in the future.
Perfect. Thank you, Neville. That's a really nice answer. Next question and last in the chemistry questions. We'll be moving on next. I'm sure the biologists will be keen to know to all of the life and biological stuff and the conservation and all that wishy-washy science. But the last of the really serious science questions, and this comes from Matabo Malangi, who asks, are there any new chemicals being discovered, or are the only existing elements those ones that we know on the periodic table? Glenn, do you want to give an answer to that? Can you hear me, Glenn? I have muted him, but he doesn't look like he's talking. Hector twice.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. From my knowledge, new elements continue to be discovered. And as I was reading around, I've discovered there have been elements which have been discovered in 2005, 2006, and in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. And we can't really say that the most important ones are the ones which we already know, because as we know by now, most minerals and most molecules, they are not made up of one element. They are made up of quite a number of elements. So we can't really say the only existing elements are the only ones which make the planet Earth habitable. Even the ones which we probably do not know now, they could be playing a significant role, but only that we do not know. So as we continue discovering or learning more, we'll learn more about them and their importance to life on Earth.
One of the important things I think to add to that is that the new elements that have been discovered do, however, tend to be very short-lived, because as you build up the periodic table from hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, all the way to iron, the nucleus is getting more and more stable towards iron, but as they get bigger than iron, they become less and less stable. And once you get to uranium and the heavy elements, they tend to be radioactive and break down to something more stable. And all of the new elements that have been created only last for fractions of a second. Though, and I don't know if Chris, you want to comment on this, I remember that there is a prediction that although the elements that we know stop being stable at a certain weight, if we can go really far beyond that, we can get to a point where it becomes stable again. Do you have any comment on that?
Not really. I hadn't heard that.
Okay.
I mean, there are these like regions of stability, I guess, that they've talked about.
Yes,
so
exactly. Island stability, I think.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very hard to do. And what kind of chemistry could you do with those elements? I don't know. They're going to be so abundant anyway. They're not going to be a huge thing, I don't think.
But I think to summarize, I mean, there are lots of elements being discovered, and there may well be other stable ones, but it's all a bit speculative, and they don't tend to last very long. All right, I'm going to push along now onto what some people call science of biology, and we're going to start with plants and photosynthesis. Kabir, could you just give us a quick overview, 2 minutes, on why is plants and photosynthesis important when thinking about a habitable planet?
Okay, so as we know, the process used by plants to convert light energy into chemical energy is known as photosynthesis. It requires solar energy, atmospheric carbon dioxide, as well as water to produce photosynthesis. And photosynthesis takes place primarily in the leaves of the plant, the green matter, and it occurs within the chloroplast of the leaf. And it can be understood in regards to our breathing itself. For example, we take in oxygen and give out CO2, whereas plant matter does the opposite. So they take in CO2 or carbon dioxide and release oxygen. So this simple interaction between air and carbon dioxide helps to keep our planet habitable by creating an ecological balance. As we know, with the increase in CO2 and atmospheric carbon, as well as temperature, all influence our planet being inhabitable. So what happens is photosynthesis helps maintain this balance by keeping our planet cooler as well. But we mustn't forget that CO2 is also important for our well-being. We don't only need oxygen, so there has to be a balance. And I think vegetation is one of the good indicators of the status of our environment. So we should therefore look at vegetative cover. Just to sum up, yeah.
Okay, and just to reiterate, Kabir, one of the really key points is obviously that all of the energy on Earth comes from the sun, and the only way we get it in a usable form is from plants. And that's really supporting absolutely everything on the Earth. So we've got a few questions then from the students on this topic. The first one actually could have come into the session. I'm going to start by putting this to you, Kabir, but I'll invite any of the biologists to come in. Hang on, let's see your microphone on. Bear with me. Okay. They asked, and this is from Andile Tonga. Andile asks, why is the protea plant only found in South Africa and only in the Cape? Why is the protea plant only found in South Africa and only in the Cape?
Okay, one of the reasons I think is that because of the climate is only suitable for the plant to grow in South Africa. Could be the climate conditions, rainfall, temperature, as well as maybe certain elements in the soil. I don't know if one of the ecologists could help me with or give me some more insight with that question.
Rendani? You're the closest we have to a botanist, Kabir.
I would think that it's mainly endemic to South Africa because of the climate suitability.
Yeah, I'll take over, Kabir. Adile, firstly to point out, it's a brilliant question. It's a really, really fascinating question, and one which Access we're quite passionate about, because we're always trying to showcase to students why South Africa is such a unique environment. You know, why is South Africa so different? The protea plants is one of those symbolic things by which we identify as South Africa being unique. And the reasons are complicated, but it comes really down to microclimates. The fact that Cape Town has a cold ocean on one coast, but a warm ocean on the other coast. That it has lowland areas, but it has highland areas. That it has high rainfall areas, but low rainfall areas. And the proteas, the fynbos ecosystem, has what's the highest beta diversity and beta biodiversity in the world. And what that means is, if you go to the South American rainforests, they have the highest alpha diversity in the world. So if you take a square meter of rainforest and you look at the number of species, then you'll find that there's the highest number in the rainforest. Cape Town and the fynbos ecosystem has the highest beta diversity. So what that means is that if you take 1 square meter, you don't find many different species. But if you move a kilometer away and take another square meter, it's completely different. And then a kilometer again, it's completely different. And this biome appears to be a response to the many varied different niches that the Cape presents. And secondly, you then add climate change and paleontology into this. As the icebergs come and go and ice ages come and go, these plants seem to have found all these different niches to survive in Cape Town. The second question I'm going to put to Rendani, and that's the plants without green pigments undergo the same photosynthesis as those that have the pigments. And that's from Given and Corsi. Rendani?
Thanks, Carl. The little knowledge I have when it comes to photosynthesis is that other plants like red-leaved tree do have plenty of chlorophyll, but the molecule is I don't know the appropriate word, but sort of masked by other pigments. So most plants also have other pigments, for example, carotenoids, which usually appear yellow to orange, and anthocyanins, which are red to purple. So one pigment usually dominates. So the leaves or the plant with red leaves probably has a higher than usually amount of anthocyanins, but chlorophyll is still present and is still doing its work.
So, I mean, the different coloured pigments, I guess, will absorb different parts of the solar spectrum, but still do the same job. Okay, thank you, Rendani. Next, we got basically the same question from both Bafana Gleba and Tembing Kosi Zulu, or Kulu. And they both really want to know about carnivorous plants. Do they still do photosynthesis? And how do they digest their prey? Glyn, are you able to tell us something about it? Hello, Glyn.
Is the question on carnivorous plants, eh?
Yes.
Carl, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead, Glyn.
Yes. Okay. I'm not pretty sure how this question ended up coming to me, but from my knowledge, carnivorous plants, they only digest their prey using enzymes. They do not have teeth or anything to chew per se. So they use enzymes. So if they do not have enzymes for themselves, some of them have bacteria which live within those plants, and those bacteria release enzymes, or they digest the food, and the plants now get the products of the decomposition from those bacteria. So that's how they get food and nutrients. So it's either they produce enzymes which digest other smaller organisms like insects or protozoa which they feed on, or bacteria, some bacteria which stay within the plants, digest, and then the products of the decomposition from those bacteria end up being the food for the plants. Then most of these plants, they are adapted for areas where the soils are not nutritious. And whether these are important in an ecosystem or not, I would say they're still important in the ecosystem because they would still act as
Okay, thank you, Glenn. It was very nice. Much appreciated. Neville would like to add to that.
So, what you're concerned about in this question is if you like, heterotrophic plants, right? Plants that, although they might photosynthesize, they might be short of nutrients or micronutrients, and so they get the micronutrients by predating on other organisms. Whether they digest them using enzymes or not, I'm not sure. Certainly, stuff rots and it's there for absorption. You know, the micronutrients are obtained that way. So I'm sure that they are still green. If I think of a Venus flytrap right now, the Venus flytrap is a green plant, definitely photosynthesizes, but certainly might not get all of its nutrients from the soil in which it grows. But there's another interesting one, and that is autotrophic animals, right? There are animals who photosynthesize. Did you know that? Well, indeed they are. But in fact, their ability to photosynthesize is not inherent. In other words, they aren't generating their own photosynthetic apparatus. They are colonizing it. They have endosymbiotic organisms that live inside them, usually mollusks or cnidarians, that live inside their tissues and photosynthesize in a sort of cooperative arrangement between the plant and the animal. There's a snail that does it, and of course all the corals do it. That's just another interesting other side of the coin.
Yeah, I learned quite recently about the animals that photosynthesize. Quite incredible and well worth looking up. And also I'd like to say that I do have some carnivorous plants at home. I'll post some pictures onto the Facebook group so you can see that they definitely do have green leaves and definitely do photosynthesize. The next question I want to move on to, I really like a lot. It's from Naziba Sadat, and Naziba asks, what's the most important factor for photosynthesis? So I think they're asking, you know, what's the limiting factor? What's the one thing that limits the rate of photosynthesis? But the nice thing I like about Naziba is after the question they say thank you, which is very sweet. And I'm going to put that to Kabir, please.
Okay, so as we know, one of the main aspects of photosynthesis is solar energy, atmospheric carbon dioxide, and water, H2O. So I would say that light also is important because the amount of light dictates how much photosynthesis synthesis is produced, or the pigments of photosynthesis are produced. So therefore, that will indicate how much of food a plant produces. However, we cannot look at it in isolation. So the more light, although it means more photosynthetic material will be produced, it also needs to have the right amounts of carbon dioxide as well as water. So those three elements are, in combination, one of the most important factors that contribute to photosynthesis on a planet.
Okay, a nice one. Thank you very much, Glenn. That's the end of our section on plant and photosynthesis. before we move on, I'm just quickly going to Twitter. We have one question on Twitter from Given Corsi. I'm going to put this to Chris. Sorry to bug you again, Chris. Given asks, isn't RNA and other biological molecules sensitive to harsh conditions? If so, how on earth did they survive the Earth's early evolution?
So this is one of the reasons that a lot of people think Earth life might have begun in the oceans, is because today we have the ozone layer, which protects around about the harmful UV rays, about 250 nanometers or so, which is also approximately where DNA has its highest absorption, and it correspondingly is easy to break, very fragile. So yeah, the idea is that perhaps life might have started in an ocean or like covered in water and been protected, and this would have helped protect that organism.
One of the problems, I guess, is that it's very good at absorbing UV. It absorbs almost all UV at about 10 meters, right?
What's that? Hang on, you broke up there, sorry. Can you repeat that?
Water absorbs almost all UV radiation after about 10 meters depth, right?
Yes. Probably even less than that. Probably you need about less than a meter probably to survive, I would think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move on now to the next topic, which is biodiversity and food webs. Again, this was one that got some quite interesting and lively questions. I'm going to start with Andile Tonga, who asks, if in a food chain the tertiary consumers were to collapse, I guess they mean got rid of, what would happen to the ecosystem? Would there be any disadvantages? Liko, would you like to comment?
Hi, Andile. Thanks for the question. Yes, if terrestrial consumers were taken out of the food chain, it would collapse because food chains, they are continuous cycle. So every living thing needs to feed to survive, and then the food chain describes who eats whom within the wild. So if the terrestrial consumers are taken out of the food chain, that means that the chain has been broken, so it would collapse. And the disadvantage of that, the cycle won't be going on now, because through food webs and food chains, that's how energy flows through the ecosystem. And then if there's no energy flowing, then consumers and producers, then life can't go on. So that would be a disadvantage if terrestrial consumers are taken out of the food chain.
Okay, nice one. Thank you, Liko. And that really links into the next question. The next question is from Pius Ulea, who asks, basically, it's quite linked, but basically it said, you know, in the food chains, what you've argued and what you've argued there is that all organisms play a significant role. But is that really true? Do really all organisms play a significant role in the habitability of Earth? And if so, should all organisms be conserved, therefore?
That's a very tricky question. I'd say yes. I'd say yes. All organisms play a significant role in the habitability of the planet, because within a food web we have our consumers are grouped into four different groups. You have your herbivores, your carnivores, your omnivores, and your detrivores. All of these which occupy different trophic levels. Your herbivores are your primary producers, and their food source are the plants. And then your carnivores are your secondary or higher animals which feed on animals. And then your omnivores, they occupy all two trophic levels, and they feed on everything. And then your detrivores, they feed on detritus. So all living organisms fall within those four categories of trophic levels, and I think they play a very important role within each group. And if one looks at ecosystem of a pond, you'd find diverse life within that little pond there, and all those organisms are important in the facilitating of the ecological services or the sustainability of that pond. So making each and every living organism or form of life important for the habitability on Earth.
So you would say that we should conserve all species?
Pardon?
So you would argue that we should conserve all species?
We can. I don't think it's feasible to conserve all species, but then life on Earth has been around longer. Life on Earth has been.
Would you like to conserve them all?
Is that except mosquitoes, maybe?
Very quick, can you repeat that?
Except mosquitoes, maybe. We can get rid of them.
Well, I was thinking more, Liko, would you like to conserve HIV?
Of course not. Some of the species we can do without, but life on Earth has been around for billions of years. Earth has been things have evolved on, like there was an era of dinosaurs, but now they were all wiped out. So we can try and conserve, but then some species at some point will go extinct and things will evolve, and then the ones that survive, they evolve and adjust to the changes.
I have a question. Rico, I have a question for you. Let's just take this fantasy situation, which is not entirely impossible, but let's assume that we find a dinosaur egg, a viable dinosaur egg, okay?
Yes.
We find some viable dinosaur DNA, and we have the ability of bringing this species back to life, right?
Yes.
It's not gone because the opportunity to resurrect the species from the past exists. Should we do it?
Bringing a dinosaur back to life.
I mean,
I think we can do without dinosaurs in this in this era of that we're in now, because back when there were dinosaurs still on Earth, the human species was not there, so it was. I think would be tampering with the balance within life itself, because over time things have evolved and dinosaurs have been evolved out, and there won't be a balance when we have dinosaurs and we have human species as well.
Okay, well, I mean, whether the human species has greater rights than all others is a debate we can have another time.
And the human angle, yeah, next debate.
My other last point is that, of course, we completely altered the environment from what it was in its pristine state already anyway. But that's anyway, thank you for that.
All right.
Okay, the next question comes from Thohoyandou Zulu again, or Zulu, I'm not sure which. And they ask, what's the impact of climate change to biodiversity loss? Rendani, would you like to go? Okay, Liko, you first.
What is the impact of climate change to biodiversity? Well, research has been done, and it's been reported that climate change has indirectly also affected biodiversity loss, and it's one of the driving threats to biodiversity loss. And climate change is driven more by human activity, and then the impact of this on climate change, biodiversity loss, is that we are losing biodiversity, which biodiversity itself gives us ecological services and all, and then that has been impacted on by climate change. But also within that, there's also another side to the impact of climate change on biodiversity, because some species have evolved ways of surviving through the changing, and they've adjusted through the changing climate, and have evolved stronger genetic diversity to survive.
Okay,
so the impact on it's a positive. It has a positive side and a negative impact on it.
Good.
Or do you like to add something, Rodani, on that?
No, I think we're good.
Yeah, I think you covered the issues, because the climate change also affecting, migratory patterns of species. There are also evidence that we are also witnessing coral bleaching. So in our marine ecosystem. So I think those are some of the things that we are witnessing at the present moment.
Okay, thank you guys. Okay, really simple question from Kopile Shlopi, who asks, what are overlapping food chains? Liko, quickly, overlapping food chains.
Overlapping food chains. Yes, I'm here. Overlapping food chains are made up of two or more food chains in connection with one another. It's like, for example, we have one food chain where there is a corn which is eaten by a grasshopper, and the grasshopper in turn is eaten by a frog, and the frog in turn is eaten by a snake. And then we have another food chain where we have a rice, and then the rice is attacked by a worm, and the worm is eaten by a bird. And then when we have what we call an overlapping food chain is when these two different food chains overlap, and then in this instance it would be that, or they are joined, it would be that the worm may also, when they are joined, the worm may also be eaten, may also feed on the corn, and then the snake, and then the worm, the bird feeds on the worm, and then the snake eats the bird, and so on and so forth. And collectively, overlapping food chains make up the whole broad category of food webs in an ecosystem.
Thank you, Liko. Very comprehensive. We had a question from Lwando Dayami, who basically is wanting to know about the conservation of abalone, which is one of South Africa's most overexploited commercial species. And she says, judging from the threat, will abalone be reaching extinction? If so, what's the predicted timeline for this species to reach extinction? And are there any means, basically, of preventing this? And luckily, we have the national expert on this sat next to me, so I'm going to pass that one to Neville.
Okay, the short answer to that is the species is not going to go extinct. Okay, and the reason for that is that the species, I mean, let me just go back one step and say abalone, the word abalone is a generic term, and there are over 100 species of abalone, but what they're obviously referring to is one specific species, which is the perlemoen in South Africa, also known as Hangout. Several species. The one that's commercially exploited is the perlemoen, and that indeed is under extreme pressure, but it will not go extinct. And the reason is that it is artificially cultured, and that there are several abalone farms which breed the species. So there's no shortage of the species. The question is, will the natural populations go extinct? And the answer to that is probably not, and the reason is that they are incredibly cryptic when they are small, and they survive. It's really the bigger animals that are targeted by commercial and poaching and sports divers. So what might happen is that the population is reduced because they're broadcast spawners. They spawn into the environment. You have to have a certain number of them to have enough eggs and sperm in the water to cause fertilization of the eggs and then the continued life cycle. If they reduce below a certain level, you might have a failure of recruitment. But in time, that will continue to occur. There are other threats on it, and those are ecological threats because they play a particular role in the ecosystem by controlling kelp, and so there are dynamics changing. The crayfish predate on the young abalone, and they are changing their range, and so there are some big ecosystemic, is that such a word, ecosystemic challenges to the species, on top of the fact that it's being heavily exploited. So there might be local extinctions. In other words, areas where they used to be very high in number, now they're no longer there. But what will happen is that they will go economically extinct. What that means is that it's no longer viable to go fishing for them because there aren't enough to catch. to spend your money in getting the equipment and your petrol to get out there, there's not enough money to be made from that particular area, so you stop fishing there. And then they will come back in that area. In other areas will be heavily exploited. So it's unlikely that they will go extinct. But what will happen is that their demise will cause changes to the ecosystem. And just as an aside, we have seen this happen in other fish species. The most celebrated one is the North Atlantic cod of Canada and the United States. Has been so badly exploited that it's no longer commercially viable to go fishing. So they can't catch any more than they've caught. So they stop fishing. But as a consequence, what was expected is that they would recover in number because they're no longer being fished. But in fact, that's not happened because they've dropped below a particular threshold and they're not recovering. So there might be long-term changes. But the short answer is they won't go extinct.
Cool. Thank you very much, Neville. Really nice when we get a question like that we can have a national expert in on. The next question I'm also going to put to Neville. And we've got basically the same question from Mendy Schultz and Holly Nell. And I'm going to synthesize it in as follows. Basically, if you look at rhinos to us all look approximately the same, and yet there's 4 or 5 different species of them. Then we look at humans. Humans, there's a little bit more variety, it would seem, than the rhinos, and yet we're all one species. And then we look at dogs, and there's a massive amount of variety, from the tiny little ones to the huge big ones, and yet they're all one species. How do we conceptualize that in terms of genetics? Why do we have these seemingly disparate definitions of species?
Well, it's not the definition of species that is a problem here. It's really a question of genetic diversity. Okay, so and again, it does in a sense. We can talk about the definition of species. For example, is a Chihuahua a dog the same species as a Great Dane? And there are ways to test that in terms of our definition of species, which is, can they produce viable offspring, right? The short answer is yes, they can. In fact, what's more interesting about dogs is that you can do a blood transfusion between any 2 dogs of any different kind, right? You can't do that with humans, for example, because humans, Carl and I, might look very similar, but in fact we might have different blood types, and his blood would be rejected by my body, and in fact cause me an allergic reaction. We have to have the same blood type. So it's not just the phenotypic expression of the physical appearance of a species that is a measure of its diversity. It's really all about the genetic diversity. So dogs are, even though you're a Chihuahua with a particular size and shape, that's only a set of the genes. The other genes are much, much more similarly related amongst dogs. The genetic diversity amongst dogs is much lower, although they might have much bigger diversity in the phenotypic expression. The opposite is true too. There are many species which have only been discovered because of their genetic differences. They call them cryptic species. They look exactly the same. There's no distinction between them genetically. They might phenotypically. They might ultimately be, once you know that they are different species, because then you go to look for those features. And there probably will be a pattern or a particular set of characteristics. I'm thinking now of things like some of the tiny crustaceans, which have always been regarded as one species. Suddenly you discover they're in fact more than one species. And so you look again and see, oh, this one's got a hair here, that one's got a hair there, which that one doesn't have, and that makes them distinct from each other phenotypically. So the point is that and first of all, it takes one to know one. I think that if you were a dog or a rhino, you would know very well if you are the same species or not the same species. For us who are not rhinos, looking at rhinos, might not be so easy to tell. And furthermore, you do get hybrids. So there are cases of species that hybridize. They're very closely related, but they are indeed different species. And when they hybridize, they can produce viable offspring in the sense that they can survive, but they can't breed themselves. Or you get hybrids that are formed, which indeed form a new species by mixing genes. But at the end of the day, it's all about genetic diversity. I hope I've answered the question.
No, that's a really nice answer. I'm going to have to. I mean, somebody's going to have to say it. But I mean, what boggles my mind here is the mechanics of the dogs. I mean, I'm trying to envisage you've got this tiny little Chihuahua. How's he going to even get up?
Well, I don't think that Chihuahuas and Great Danes breed.
You just said that they can.
They can.
How?
Well, you can artificially inseminate.
Okay.
But the point is that I'm saying technically they can be made to have offspring. You know,
but they don't.
Often you see dogs like I don't know, a basset, you know, which just looks like it's got legs that are too short because people have artificially selected different characteristics in different breeds of dogs to bring out a particular artificial set of characteristics. So that can be done.
Yeah, you've spoiled it for me now. I really had this wonderful image of scientists locking a pig and a small dog in a room and just checking that they could reproduce.
Sorry.
All right, thank you, Neville. Last question in this section. I'm going to put this to Rendani. In South Africa, what measures can be taken to control biodiversity loss? Just briefly, some overview, please.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. You know, although it's not, easy to pinpoint, measures, but I must say, South Africa we've got, good measures to control biodiversity loss. Only on paper. This also goes out also to the international community because remember we had the 2010 CBD target, which was not really fully addressed. So I think programs such as the HPW, online course, they're also doing a good job just to really give the learners and students from historical disadvantaged communities to value the importance of biodiversity. So in other words, I'm saying that education is also trying its best, but the issue, is with the big bosses. I'm talking about the policymakers. So it's not easy to say what are we gonna do because scientists are doing their part, but the problem is with the implementation of policies, which they look good on paper, but when it comes to implementing them, I mean, it's a big problem. So I think it's going to be a war going forward. But South Africa per se has got good organizations when it comes to biodiversity conservation. But the problem is with the financial support from the relevant authorities. Because if we can give maybe biodiversity sort of priority, like what we're doing with the AIDS program and stuff, if we can channel more money, I think we can be able to win this particular battle of biodiversity loss.
Thanks, Danny. And I guess I would say if we could answer that question, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. We would have a much more important job actually doing it.
Yeah, so it's a war. Let's fight this war like we're fighting the AIDS and Ebola war.
All right, guys. I want to press on to our last of the talks, which was biogeochemical cycles and feedbacks. Glenn, if you're still with us, can you give us a quick summary? Hello, Glenn. Come in, Venda. Venda, are you there? Counting 3, 2. Venda, can you hear us? All right, I'm guessing that we've lost the University of Venda for the time being. So I will do the best I can in giving a quick summary of these. Oh, there you are.
You hear me now?
We can hear you. Can you give us a quick summary of cycles? Glenn, can you give us a summary of biochemical cycles?
Carl, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. So basically, it's the summary of biogeochemical cycles, right? If I got it right.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Okay. Okay. I think, as you all know by now, that the word biogeochemical is a word which talks about everything which we know about Earth. Bio referring to the living part of the cycles, and geo referring to the Earth material, the geology, which forms part of the geology part, and the chemical part consisting of the elements, atoms, or matter which is taking place in these cycles. So some scientists argue that an understanding of these biogeochemical cycles and the levels at which they operate, just by having an understanding of that, can help to solve much of the problems which we currently have on our planet Earth. So in summary, I'll just give an overview of two cycles. I'll use carbon and nitrogen as examples of how matter cycles on Earth. As you all know by now that matter is neither created nor destroyed. So all that we have here on Earth, it's finite, meaning that it's limited. So with the element carbon, it's abundant in the atmosphere, and it's one of the most important components of all living organisms. And we have processes like carbon, like photosynthesis, and the oceans are the two most processes which are taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Then we have processes like respiration and combustion. Those are the two most important processes adding carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Then it would have been nice to be illustrating this with diagrams and all, of which we cannot do that at the present moment. But with nitrogen, with the nitrogen cycle, we have got an abundance of nitrogen in the atmosphere. The unfortunate thing is it's in an unusable form, because the nitrogen in the atmosphere is innate. It's the nitrogen molecule has got a triple bond, which is makes it very stable and makes it very difficult to split or break it. But however, through the action of some microorganisms, some bacteria, and the action of lightning, we are able to convert the nitrogen in the atmosphere to usable forms of nitrogen. But with the nitrogen cycle, one would appreciate that much of the cycle is taking place in the soil, and it involves a lot of microorganisms converting nitrogen from the innate form or ammonium and other nitrogen logged in components making up living organisms. So when these organisms die, when living organisms die, microorganisms act on them and release this nitrogen in the form of ammonium into the soil. And microorganisms act on these on ammonium and other nitrogen compounds to convert them into nitrites and nitrates, which are later then also taken up by plants, and the cycle continues. So in a nutshell, that's how the matter cycles on Earth. And it is important to note that human intervention into these cycles has led to some of these elements end up accumulating in one part of our ecosystems than they would have naturally been. So in a nutshell, I think that's the general summary of the biogeochemical cycles.
Nice one. Thank you very much, Glenn. That was very comprehensive. And then the important thing, just quickly on that, is that the second talk, biogeochemical feedbacks, just look at the fact that far from being a passenger on the Earth's surface that being affected by climate, biology actually has many mechanisms by which it changes the environment and changes the climate. And we looked at some of those, from releasing oxygen to releasing cloud condensation nuclei to changing the local soils, etc. So it's really important to think about these biogeochemical cycles as the way by which everything is recycled. So we never run out of carbon, we never run out of nitrogen in life because it's recycled, but also the way in which life can actually affect the climate. Now, I'm going to put this question to Venda. I'll let Glyn and Hector answer it together. But it's basically, you know, if the matter and energy can't be created or destroyed, how does the Earth maintain balance when we're continually getting light from the sun? How does it stay habitable?
Okay, let me try to answer that. It is true that energy can either be created nor destroyed, but it can only be converted from one form to another. But the whole issue with the anthropogenic effects of global warming lies in the fact that if these cycles were to occur naturally in the way they would normally have done without human interventions, you wouldn't find any element accumulating in any part of the earth or the ecosystem where to undesirable levels. So in this case, before human beings and the whole issue of industrialization came into being, we didn't have a lot of carbon dioxide accumulating in the atmosphere to the levels which we are experiencing today. So the whole issue of anthropogenic effects of global warming lies in the fact that we are burning fossil fuels more than what it used to be in the past, and more we are having a lot of carbon dioxide accumulating in the atmosphere to undesirable levels. So in as much as we have carbon cycling, but we are having a lot of it now accumulating in the atmosphere, hence the increasing atmospheric temperatures.
Okay, thank you very much, Glyn. The next one's a really, really interesting question, and I think I'm going to direct this to Hector to comment first. And the question is that we've been told that the Earth is heating, and we have this problem with you know, climate change and a warming world. But in the last few years, we've had a record amount of ice cover in the Arctic. Why is this?
Sorry, Carl, can you come back on that question? I didn't hear very clearly.
Okay, we've told that the Earth is heating. We're told that we have anthropogenic global warming, but yet the last few years we've had a record cover of sea ice in the Arctic. So there's been a record amount of Arctic sea ice. Can you explain why that is?
Can you write it down, Carl?
Sure. I'll send it to you. Coming up.
No,
have you got that, Hector?
Why is that? Oh, okay. Okay, I got it now. Okay, I got it, Carl. Yes, in fact, we have had some of the, in fact, the 2000, the last decade from 2000 to 2010 was arguably the warmest on record, but there has been also, the scientists have noted, there has been also a decline in the warming in recent years, just like some recoveries have also been observed in the ozone hole. But yes, there is variability in the warming as well. So the accumulation of Arctic ice is a function of fluctuations, because the warming that is occurring is also vulnerable to fluctuations which are also occurring within the general trend of warming.
Okay, thank you, Hector. Much appreciated. Okay, guys, we're coming towards the end, and I'm well aware that we only have 5 minutes remaining of our session, but I just wanted to very, very quickly touch on the last section I had. I got a bunch of questions that weren't directly related to any of the topics today, but some of them were so interesting or relevant that I just thought we should ask them. The first one is a really general one, but I think an important one that lots of people will be interested in, and that's, where's a good place to do a master's in biodiversity? And I'm going to ask Liko to comment.
Well, there are a number of institutions here nationally that you can do biodiversity in, a master's in biodiversity. One of them, which is Rhodes University, they do offer a master's in biodiversity. You can also go to Stellenbosch University, University of the Western Cape, UP, and University of Pretoria. Also, if you are looking to do it abroad, I know that Oxford does offer biodiversity courses for masters, and also Leeds University. We recently, last year, we had a visiting researcher from Leeds University who came to give a presentation on our department, and they do. He mentioned that they do a lot of work in biodiversity that side too. So yeah, there's a really lot of options that one can go to depending on whether you want to do it here or abroad. You have choices and all.
If you were going to study it in South Africa, Liko, where would you go?
I'd go to Rhodes University.
Of course. That's what you would say. But then, actually, you know, I know people who've done masters at universities and not been happy with that institution. So, you know, why not? If you say Rhodes, then that's a good recommendation. There's one question we had from Henrik Oliver, who said, would the world be better off without humans? It's a question that often comes up, and I think it probably will come up in the next section again. But I want to ask a question to Henrik on his question, so I'm just going to put it out there for now, which is, if you say, would the Earth be better off without humans, I would say, but for who? I mean, better off, who's going to enjoy it? I mean, the works of Shakespeare are going to be absolutely useless if there are no humans to enjoy them. I mean, okay. And then let's say goodbye to Neville. He's off to a second meeting. And we're just a couple of questions away from the end, which will be in 2 minutes. The next question I want to ask just comes from Oko Soshiange. And she wants to ask, and I'm going to put this to everybody just to finish and go around. So in finishing, could you please answer this question, say anything you've got left to say, and then say goodbye. And the question is, if you had all of the money in the world to advance your field of science, what would you attempt to do or study, and why? So I'm going to go from left to right as they appear on my screen. Chris, you're first up.
It's a very interesting question. I have no idea. I guess, you know, I do think it would be very good if there was a lot more money for science and like to study all the rest of our solar system. I think we'd learn a lot about ourselves, and I think that'd be a good way to spend the money. But yeah, I appreciate it. So thanks. Really enjoyed it.
Okay, thanks, Chris. In Venda, anybody want to answer? Well, you're going to have to. Somebody in Venda. if they can hear me. Can you hear me, Venda?
Yes, Carl. If I had a lot of money, probably I would invest it in trying to see how much physics can explain the action of the atmosphere, and also to increase our ability to predict the evolution of the atmosphere at much longer time scales.
Cool. Thank you, Hector. Kabir?
Okay, must it be related to my field, Carl?
Sorry?
Must it be specifically related to my field?
No, anything. If you've got this
Yeah,
money,
I would surely invest the money in sustainable development, because I think that we need to obviously manage our resources without compromising future generations. And I think the environment always takes the back seat when it comes to development. And we need to ensure that our practical applications are more sound, and that the environment is always important in what we do as human beings. Because without the environment, again, we don't have a planet. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kabir. Liko?
Well, if I had all the money in the world, I'd start by more concentrating on research that is more based on outreach research, trying to getting communities around involved, and what research is, and how what actually we do as scientists within the science field.
Nice.
Make it more reachable to outside people, outside the science field.
So it's a really laudable aim, and very different from the first two scientists. It's quite interesting to see. Is Rob there?
Yes.
Yes, he is here.
Rob, what would you do with all the money in the world?
I'll give it to Liko.
Thanks, Rob. Rendani, I'll come to you.
Thanks, Carl. If I'm loaded, I will embark on a project focusing on food security and biodiversity conservation, specifically, in Venda. Thanks.
Okay, so I was quite interested there by those answers. After the first two, I thought that the story was going to be that, given infinite resources, all scientists would just do their own research. But actually, Kabir and Liko bucked that trend, and Rob just wanted to give it all the way to Liko. So quite an interesting range of options. I'm going to draw a line under there. It's 2 o'clock, which is the end of our session. I'd just like to say a really big thank you to each and every one of the panelists. It's not an easy thing to do, to come online, just to give up 2 hours of your time to try and answer people's questions. And it's quite an intimidating thing, I can say, from this side of the microphone, to sit here for 2 hours and be asked all sorts of questions that you might not know the answers to, and do your best. So I think they've done a fantastic job. I'd like to single out specifically Chris, who got up at 6 o'clock in the morning to come and help you guys out. So a big thank you to him and for doing that. And then to all of you for all of your questions. It's made this such a lively discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you guys have too. And thank you very much, and goodbye.